You're standing in a doorway at 800 feet, in the dark, wearing more than your own body weight in gear, and in about 4 seconds, you're going to step out into nothing. That's not a stunt. That's Tuesday for the 82nd Airborne. By the time a paratrooper reaches the door of a C-17, he's carrying his rifle, his body armor, his ammunition, his water, his food for days, and everything else he'll need on the ground. Because once that canopy opens, nobody's coming to resupply him for a while. Add the main chute and the reserve on top of that, and some loads have been measured pushing past 160 pounds out the door. That's before he's fought a single minute of the war he just jumped into. So here's the actual question worth asking, and it's not, can he jump? Anyone can fall out of a plane once. The question is whether a human body can survive the landing, function without real sleep, run on rationed calories, and still make good decisions with a rifle in his hands for days, not minutes. That's the whole game. And the answer says less about the equipment than it does about how much a person can absorb before something breaks. Start with the weight, because the weight is the first lie the job tells you. 90 to 120 pounds is the standard combat jump load. Ammunition, water, a few days of food, communications gear, whatever the mission needs. It sounds survivable on paper. It stops sounding survivable the moment you remember it's strapped to a human's spine during a parachute landing, which is functionally a controlled fall from about the height of a 2-story building. Add the parachute assembly itself. The main canopy alone runs around 30 pounds, the reserve another 15, and you understand why paratroopers don't so much land as arrive. Every pound on that rig has to earn its place. Riflemen carry a basic combat load of ammunition, plus whatever the mission adds on top. Extra belts for the gunner, batteries for the radio, water, that alone runs 8 pounds a gallon. Nothing on a jump is optional weight. If it's on your body, someone decided you'd need it more than you'd need to move faster without it. That trade-off gets made for you, long before you ever reach the door. The hours before that door open aren't rest either. You're on the ground for what troopers call the sit, rigged up in full combat gear for hours before wheels up, sweating through the layers you'll be sleeping in for the next several nights, checking straps that a jump master is going to check again anyway, because a loose strap at altitude isn't a paperwork problem. It's a way to lose a leg bag full of gear on the way down. Or worse. By the time the ramp comes up, you've already been standing under the weight longer than most people carry a suitcase through an airport. That's rung 1. It gets worse. Rung 2 is the jump itself, and this is where the gear stops being cargo and starts being a variable that can hurt you. You go out the door already overloaded, and the parachute doesn't care how heavy you are, it opens the same way regardless, which means more weight equals a harder, faster jolt through your harness the second that canopy catches air. Then you're descending at something close to 22 to 24 feet per second, in the dark, trying to steer 100+ pounds of gear toward a drop zone you can barely see. And the landing itself is where a huge share of jump injuries happen. Ankles, backs, knees. Because you're hitting the ground at that speed with all that extra mass along for the ride. General James Gavin, who commanded the 82nd through Normandy and made more combat jumps than any other American general in the war, fractured 2 discs in his own back on a landing during Operation Market Garden. He kept commanding the division anyway. That's not the exception. That's the baseline expectation the job runs on. Gavin had a rule for his officers going back to when he first took over the 505th. Be the first one out of the aircraft, every time, training or combat. Lead from the door, not from behind it. You land, you're alone or close to it, because airborne drops scatter badly, and by design, nobody pretends otherwise. On the jump into Sicily, high winds threw paratroopers across the whole island, and Gavin's own stick landed him with barely a dozen men, 20 miles from the objective. they moved out toward it anyway. So the first hours after the jump aren't rest. They're finding your unit, in the dark, still wearing all that weight, while the adrenaline that got you out the door starts to burn off and your body sends you the bill for it. Your hands are shaking by then, not from fear anymore, just from the crash after the spike. There's no time to nurse it. You're cutting your chute free, stuffing it or burying it, depending on the mission, and moving toward a rally point using a compass bearing and a cricket clicker instead of a radio, because radios give away a position and a metal clicker doesn't. Every noise out here means something. A twig under a boot sounds like an artillery round in your own head at 3 a.m, alone, in a country that isn't yours, still carrying 100 pounds you haven't been able to set down since before the plane. The heat or the cold doesn't wait for you to catch your breath either. Depending on the season and the theatre, a paratrooper is fighting his own core temperature on top of everything else, sweating through a jump in the tropics with no way to dry out, or shivering through a European winter landing with wet gear freezing against his skin. Water becomes its own math problem the moment you're on the ground. 8 pounds a gallon means you can't carry unlimited water without turning your own hydration supply into the thing weighing you down. So every unit runs a constant, quiet calculation. Drink enough to function, not so much you're carrying dead weight uphill. Rung 3 is food, and food is where the math turns against you fastest. A paratrooper in the field is burning enormous amounts of energy, moving under load, digging in, staying alert on 2 hours of sleep, and eating out of a pouch designed to survive being dropped from a plane, not designed to taste like anything. The ration gets you enough calories to function, not enough to recover. There's no dining facility, no hot meal on a schedule you can count on. Whatever's in the pouch is what you get. And the deficit between what you're burning and what you're eating just keeps compounding, day over day, the same way it does for anyone running a sustained physical effort on partial fuel. There's a small mercy in it, and it's worth saying because the job isn't only misery stacked on misery. Troopers trade. The guy who can't stand the peanut butter swaps it for someone else's crackers. Somebody always has a stash of hot sauce they guard like ammunition. It's a tiny, dumb ritual, and it matters more than it should when everything else about the day is designed to wear you down. But the trade doesn't add calories, it just makes the ones you have easier to choke down. You don't feel the deficit as hunger after a while. You feel it as your reaction time getting a half second slower than it was yesterday. And a half second is the difference between seeing a problem in time and not. Hygiene follows the same logic as the food. There's no shower on a drop zone. Baby wipes and a change of socks become the entire toiletry kit for days at a time, and the socks matter more than almost anything else in the bag. Wet feet inside boots for long enough turns into an injury on its own, one that can pull a trooper out of the fight without a single enemy round fired. So a dry pair of socks, kept sealed against the rain, is worth more real estate in that pack than most people would guess. It's a small detail. It's also the difference between walking and not walking 3 days from now. Rung 4 is sleep, and this is the one that actually ends careers, not the jump. You don't get 8 hours in a rotation where someone always has to be awake and watching. You sleep in your gear, sometimes with a weapon against you, so you'll wake up before you'd ever let go of it, on the ground for however long the mission allows, which in the opening days of an operation can mean 2 or 3 hours a night, broken into pieces by radio checks and guard rotations. The body can absorb 1 bad night, it cannot absorb 5. Judgment slows first, the small decisions, the double checks you'd normally make without thinking about them, and judgment is the one piece of equipment you can't resupply. A rifle jams and you can clear it. A mind that's 5 nights deep in sleep debt doesn't clear the same way. Here's the part almost nobody puts in the recruiting material. It isn't the jump that breaks people. Paratroopers train constantly, and by the time they're doing it for real, the fall itself is close to routine. Gavin made hundreds of training jumps, some on experimental parachutes nobody had fully tested yet, long before Normandy was ever on a map in front of him. What actually wears a unit down is the way all 3 of these things, the weight, the food deficit and the sleep debt, stack on top of each other and compound. You land under 100 pounds of gear, already carrying an injury risk. You're immediately behind on calories. You're immediately behind on sleep. None of those 3 problems ever gets a chance to reset, because the next mission window doesn't wait for you to recover from the last one. A trooper 3 days into an operation isn't fighting at the level he trained at. He's fighting at whatever's left after the weight, the hunger, and the exhaustion have all taken their cut. And the job still expects full performance out of what's left. That's not a flaw in the system. That's the trade-off the entire Airborne concept is built on. Get there faster than anyone else can, and pay for that speed later, in the body. One deficit at a time. That's the actual design of the 80 seconds whole mission profile. This is the division that can load a plane within 18 hours of getting the call and be moving anywhere on Earth the Army needs it. No other unit that size can promise that kind of speed. The trade-off for that speed is that nothing about the landing is soft. You go in heavy, you land hard, you eat rationed calories, you sleep in fragments, and you're expected to be combat effective through all of it, because the entire point of an airborne division is to be ready before conditions are ever comfortable enough to wait for. And it isn't only the newest guy in the stick who pays that price. Gavin himself carried a spinal injury through the rest of the Market Garden campaign and then straight into the Battle of the Bulge, leading thousands of men through some of the worst winter fighting of the war on a back that never properly healed. He wasn't unusual for pushing through it. He was just the one with the rank to make the decision for himself instead of having it made for him. Rank doesn't buy you out of the deficit. It just means you carry it, while also carrying everyone else's. That's what separates this from almost any other physically demanding job you could name. A construction crew that's short on sleep goes home at the end of the shift. A distance runner who's underfueled can stop at mile 18. A paratrooper 3 days into an operation doesn't get either option. The mission doesn't pause because the body wants it to. Whatever state you're in when the next contact happens is the state you fight in. Undertrained bodies break faster, but even the most conditioned ones are running a countdown, and the training is really just a way of buying more time on that clock, not stopping it. And the deficit doesn't announce itself all at once. It shows up in small failures first. A map read wrong, a radio check missed by a beat, a trooper who normally clears his weapon in his sleep, fumbling it once under a full moon. None of those, alone, means much. Stacked together, over enough sleepless nights and rationed meals, they're the early signs of a unit running on fumes and still being asked to hold ground. The training exists specifically to push that breaking point further out than it would sit for anyone untrained. It doesn't erase the point, it just moves it. So the next time you see the footage, the ramp door open, the green light, a line of soldiers stepping out into the dark, one after another, gone in under a second apiece, remember what's actually happening underneath that image. That's not just a jump, that's 100 pounds of consequence strapped to a person who's already running a calorie deficit and a sleep debt before his boots ever touch dirt. Trusting a canopy, a harness, and the training underneath all of it to get him standing on the ground in one piece. And then asking him to fight on whatever's left. There's a reason recruiters lean so hard on the jump itself. The door, the count, the canopy opening against a night sky. It photographs well. It's 4 seconds of pure adrenaline, and it's close to the easiest part of the whole operation once a trooper's done it enough times. Nobody puts the third night on a recruiting poster. Nobody films the moment a trooper realizes his hands are shaking not from cold, but from 3 days of running on partial calories and partial sleep, and he still has to make a call that matters. That's the actual test the 82nd is built around, and it's the one almost nobody outside the unit ever sees. Would you last one night out there, gear and all? Not the jump, the 3 days after it.